originally I was studying international relations, but then I noticed this kind of insufficiency of international relations analysis, because this mode of analysis was like short term. They did not account for long historical civilizational processes in international relations. This is actually how I switched from studying international relations to study history and philosophy of history. Fortunately, in Poland, at Jagiellonian University, both at the European Studies Department and at Philosophy Department, we did study philosophy of history, and Oswald Spengler was one of the authors that we did study. We read the Polish translation called Zmierzch Zachodu. And the problem that emerged for me, especially, is whether we could actually take the civilizational historical narratives about the cyclical or spiral nature of historical progress, and whether we can apply it to the study of modern international relations, modern demography, modern cultural evolution. And it occurred to me that we can, and Spengler and Toynbee and other scholars who should be completely reread today, because we face the greater dynamics of globalization. The civilizational ideas return in 21st century because of the gradually faster speed of societal evolution. That is why we need a completely new theory of civilizational change that would account for liquidity, dynamics, and of course cyclical nature of or spiral, so both cyclical and linear nature of historical progress. And I deeply believe Spengler, Toynbee, modern philosophers of history are really needed to make not only the West but the world understand itself again. Okay, so just I'll probably start with this traditional question of yours. So why Spengler? So the idea is that basically Spengler and philosophy of history is normally present in the curriculum of philosophy of history in Poland. So I had two professors who taught Spengler, apart from like Toynbee, Ortega, and the other philosopher of history. And my way from Spengler was like from Spengler to Toynbee and back, because I first read Spengler, then I switched to Toynbee, and I wrote a paper that sparked substantial interest in the Muslim world about return of Toynbee and how EU can resemble what Toynbee thought as a universal state, and how it can be likened to Roman Empire. Then I realized that Dr. Engels is having similar metaphor, similar analogy, but he's starting with Spengler and source, and I reread Spengler, and that's the result. First of all, for you who are dealing with civilizational theory, we can say we're in the avant-garde. Here is like Google Ngram viewer. It means actually that the civilization identity in the Google index books in English language, or the idea of civilization, is basically gaining the interest. It's more and more frequently appearing in the scholarship and in literature, which means people kind of use the term as a mode of analysis. And let me start with this phrase by Peter Sloterdijk that we don't have theoretic tools to speak about ongoing demographic change of Europe. And Spengler offers this kind of organic theoretical framework. I don't agree with like general models Spengler puts forward, but I find many of his ideas very, very inspiring. One of them is this idea of I'll be speaking about this, his notion of empire. So this is like very, very short in case you didn't read or just to make it fresh. So for Spengler, the civilization is this kind of late culture that is already starting to decline, and then it kind of forms an empire, which is an expanding entity. And so the features of empire or Falahand, he uses these terms interchangeably. It does not, they don't mean the same, more or less, but in every context. But first, it's a post-historical expanding entity that has a cosmopolitan ideology of peace. It struggles with depopulation, so it needs migration. It has a specified set of values. It suffers from intellectual weakness of the elites, and it has to tackle problems related to urbanization. And then I started to think, okay, so for a moment, be serious. Just compare it to the Roman Empire. And the idea that EU is kind of resembling Roman empires, it's not new. I mean, Spengler himself was saying about this Phocian civilization, kind of creating at some point the universal state. Toynbee was saying that there should emerge universal state in Europe that will resemble Roman Empire. Jan Zielonka, Oxford scholar, international relations, he's from this liberal perspective speaks of EU as a kind of empire. David Engels directly compares it to Pax Romana, and myself and other. There are many different sources, analogies, but so it's not like something really new. So are we there yet? The idea is like I just treated Spengler very seriously, and then I try to like step by step, to show whether EU could kind of manifest the features that Spengler thought are important as this kind of decisive feature for the Roman Empire. And of course, EU is an enlarging entity, as Spengler thought. It's merging the variety of peoples, of course. Whether it is post-historical, well, I just put the question mark there because some people say EU is post-historical because it treats democracy as ultimate, indispensable historical tenet that no factor can change. But some of them say no, it's really historical because EU was created due to historical reasons. So whether it's depopulating, yes. I mean, the idea is just we have lots of indices that suggest so. Whether it has this sensual mass culture Spengler thought of, we can say. I mean, I just stick it at yellow, but I could also put a question mark there. Whether it exhibits the self-imposed intellectual weakness. So some people say, for example, like in Germany, that the post-war mission, as I'm a journalist myself, so I just kind of try to trace the media theory. And I once met this kind of analysis that the agenda of the media in Europe and Germany, different countries, becomes educational. So it's like this educational principles is opposed to this information-related principles. So some information are not like spread because of the public interest, because of many different educational reasons. Whether it faces problems of rapid urbanization, of course it is. Well, yes, look at Brussels, look at some places like in Sweden or even in Poland, which are depopulating because people are going, like rushing to the cities in the search for jobs. Whether it exhibits cosmopolitan philosophy of peace, of course, like the postmodern tolerance. When you look at the very papers of Schuman, when you look at the very idea how the EU justifies its existence, its presence. So quite a few features, almost like they fulfill this kind of Spengler definition of this Spengler's empire. But now, why this happens, right? The idea is that there are many similarities between empires throughout history. Post-war genesis, right? If something is post-war, then the empire or the entity is created because we want to prevent the future war. So the genesis kind of make it similar. Another thing is patterns of intercultural psychology. Like even if we as individuals are unpredictable, as a mass, we behave like water. Like this is the idea with game theoretic modeling of, I don't know, societal threats, contagion, these things that can predict this populational reactions and behavior on the mass scale. Another thing, structural similarities, of course, when different similar actors create the complexity of a system, then the system might have the similarities. Geographical similarities. Some empires cover similar regions. This generates similar challenges. And of course, there's one thing I want to stress quite fairly is this hierarchical networking. This is basically the idea I will just speak about just in a second, related to a field called complexity theory. So how complexity grows and how societal structures emerge and how they decline. Of course, differences exist, but I won't speak about them for the sake of this lecture. So here you have this idea by Barabasi. Hierarchical networking means that every process you are speaking about, if it's on a large scale and it's populational, follows this bell curve. So, like imagine like here you have like networks of cities, right? Networks of so you see that some of them are the hubs. So the great amount of links, great amount of given type of interaction, and some of them are not that much integrated. And it follows, and it apparently the urbanizational processes, the processes related to mass migration, the processes related to even integration and ethnic or religious or whatever segregation kind of are following this network principle. I will just return to this later. So now let's ask about the Spenglerian catastrophes. Right? Are we doomed yet? Which actually should be rephrased that whether if EU resembles Roman or Pax Romana, are we to ultimately follow Spengler's pattern of decline of civilization? And you can say different things, right? Spengler might have correctly identified this kind of civilization stage because we have already seen how EU kind of resembles his idea of the empire. But even then, Pax Romana lasted like 2 or 3 centuries, which is not that much catastrophical vision, right? It's like it's not saying like Spengler. If you read Spengler and you think of EU, it doesn't mean EU must collapse or it's bad. No, it's just it has some features that may actually last for centuries. But my interpretation is that there are many variables that testify against this Spengler's determinism. And here, for example, take technological progress. Like macrostructural changes now happen faster. I mean, we have lots of interactions. Contagions, can cover the whole globe in a few days. Another thing, modern economic systems have great energy to absorb shocks. So EU could not necessarily. The opposite. Okay, but we can discuss that, right? Yeah, they're also vulnerable. But we possess big data. We can record past solutions. Someone yesterday recalled Ortega's tiger. So the tiger of yesterday is the same as tiger of tomorrow. Whereas we're different tomorrow. We will be different tomorrow because we have a record of our past errors. And also this is important thing that globalization alters dynamics of evolution. So in rephrasing this in game theoretic terms, the very rules of the game change. So networks of causal interaction now involve whole globe. And I'll give you the example. This is one of the Polish newspaper asked my friends, we created state power index that measures the power of the states globally. And we kind of superimpose on these civilizational notions. So like here's like the Western civilization, Confucian civilization with China, and for example, Islamic and so on and so on. And the idea is, well, we can say, okay, we're here. We extrapolated the current trends ceteris paribus, which means with all other factors just not changing. All right, we can say, okay, well, the West is declining. And everyone is speaking about the rise of China in the media, it's how it will be changing. But the idea is our Spenglerian, so to speak, Roman Empire has to interact with all of these entities. There are different civilizations, different political entities globally. So, and Spengler, as we know from yesterday, was a bit neglecting, right? Like, for example, the US or neglecting other parts of the globe in places. But yeah, so now let's switch to, there was an anthology we published for the city of Wrocław about this kind of foresight prognostic entity about how the future will unfold. And I will just quote you the quotation of Umberto Eco from the introduction to the book. So Eco was writing like this. This is a very nice quote. What is required to make a good Middle Ages? First of all, a great peace that is breaking down, a great international power that is unified the world in language, customs, and that at a certain point, thanks to its own ungovernable complexity, collapses. It collapses because the barbarians, in brackets, are pressing at the borders. These barbarians are not necessarily uncultivated, but they are bringing new customs, new views of the world. So it's like, it sounds as if he was speaking of this kind of Roman Empire stuff, parts of the world, but he's speaking of what is required to make good Middle Ages. So he's not referring to the antiquity, he's just referring, he's just claiming these kind of, these sets of factors are used to unfold and create this kind of new reality. And this is why I'm speaking about new medieval perspective, because as we remember from Fernand Braudel, long duration processes reach further than the decline of a political entity. They just, you can count them in like hundreds of years, and every decline brings a new rise about. So my analysis tries to avoid this kind of Spenglerian determinism, acknowledging his proper insight. And my claim is just Pax Europeana is only beginning, because we will face the processes that can be likened to this period of transition from Roman era to the medieval era. I just show you, this is from my TEDx lecture. Jesus, it doesn't work. Oh God, it's a pity. Okay. It was about the Roman soldiers switching to medieval knight, like in this kind of, doesn't matter. So what awaits us is, firstly we have this kind of Roman, I call it Pax Roman stage. It's just like this kind of universal stage. Then we have the neo-medieval stage, which means we will have same Europe, but governed by different principles. So let's. Oh Jesus, this is. Oh, sorry. I'm back. Let's discuss. How much time do I have? Okay, half. Let's discuss different phases or different dimensions of reality. First, start with international relations. So this is the state power index we created, and we were able to see the power of like European, the world entities. And we had the ticker here, just to tick here, and group EU countries together. And then it would appear that EU, as created, for example, as a federation or whatever, is the greatest potential global player, or that would basically, yes, potential. That would really even be more powerful than the US and the China. But of course, it's only on paper, because the EU is not, not yet, or not a federation. But the idea is that in international relations, we will have this kind of conflicting interests within the European system. At the same time, you will have this Eurosceptical, moods, but you also have this kind of concentrating moods because of the rise of China, because of the United States policy. And this kind of resembles of this Pax Roman stage, of course, without China, without US, but this is the metaphor. But later, there's a British theorist of international relations, Hadley Boo, who's saying that the fragmentation of structures of powers, different layers of influence would in a way transform the nation state into this kind of network state that will basically have to account for many different responsibilities. And based on Joseph Tainter, American anthropologist, I'm claiming that EU is unlikely to collapse due to lack of energy to manage its complexity, because it has the energy. I'm speaking of physical energy, not of spiritual energy. but it can crack, or it can bad things happen to EU because of the lack of political will. This is dangerous, and to prevent EU from collapsing, it would have to kind of reform internal structure, because what we can see, and we'll see just further, we'll see the tensions, the internal tensions growing. So another dimension, religion, right? The Roman imperial era was this kind of time of, I use the term dappled. Dappled, you know what's dappled? Dappled is just like these shadows. Like imagine this is like European territory, and they will be dappled by different intensification of similar or partially different phenomena, network system of cultural and social impact. And I'm just modeling it as this kind of like interacting systems of beliefs, right? So we have like Christian faith, we have Islam, we have non-religion, right? As also as a kind of system of beliefs, and they will interact. And what we already can see in the EU is that some states, like for example in Eastern Europe, would readily claim there should be something like the leading culture of that's of a given society. So it would actually get the evolutionary bonus, and this given culture would have greater impact on the territory of the state, whereas other states are claiming there's no leading culture, and in this kind of system, democracy will elevate regional beliefs. That's what I'm saying about dappled Europe, and this will go further to the neo-medieval stage, because like as we know from history, this static state of affairs of interaction is unlikely. It's theoretically possible, but it's unlikely. So my claim is these systems of beliefs I just mentioned before will have to interact and kind of cooperate, and there will be a risk that some of these components of the system will not remain coherent. That's why I'm just using the phrase, which is an inversion of medieval phrase cuius regio eius religio. So the authoritarian ruler could kind of impose the religion on the society. So whereas in Europe, because of democracy as giving the bonus for the people and elevates their social needs bottom up, we can say about cuius religio eius regio, which means the religions that will be dominated, or the values, maybe broadly, dominating the region will be exerting greater influence. And there's an interview with me about this for one of the Arabic portals, Our Islamic Future, that I would encourage you to look at. Okay, now return to demography. So there are quite a few scholars, in fact you could see this in the media, in journalism and in the press. So they're likening this migration as a kind of beginning of Völkerwanderung, so this kind of late movement of peoples within antiquity that paved the way for the Middle Ages. And if we are to believe, for example, Bruno Kahl, the German, the person related to German, intelligence, like there will be millions of people trying to reach Europe soon, and we will have to really think of how to manage this influx, right? But this situation, of course, again, will not last forever. The idea is that in the neo-medieval stage, we will have this. We'll already experience the cultural self-expression of new inhabitants, democracy-driven, and they will have to get competencies to, plug themselves into the European job market. But there is the risk that if the young population of newcomers gets disillusioned, then we have a risk of riots, political separatism, and even the change of political systems within Europe. And this is the table from Gunnar Heinzson, NATO College of Rome lecturer, who's just showing how the demographic structure of the world looks like. So we Europe, we are all there. I mean, we're physically, we can say we're declining in terms of fertility rates. That's why that's why the cultural tenets of foreign cultures will have the greater rate of expression in Europe, Europe to come. Again, the idea of urbanism, right? In Pax Roman stage, you had this process related to urbanization of the cores. This is precisely Spengler, and this depopulation of the peripheries, right? But this will again not last forever. We could expect, and this is like purely modern input here. There will be two factors that are important for prognosis. First is technological unemployment, which means people are losing jobs because technology, automation, takes them, and the idea of universal income. If these processes will be problematic, if the universal basic income would be introduced in some countries, then the trend can reverse, and because of the distant work, people would not have to go to the core cities to get the job. Okay, now it's this one is interesting. How the culture and ethnicity of Europe would evolve. Let me start with Thomas Schelling, this Nobel Prize laureate. He was dealing with game theory and ethnic, religious, etc. segmentation, right? And this is his idea. I just show you, tell you very briefly. Like you have like red agents and black agents, basically two different types of color of agents. Every agent has like 8 neighbors, and in every turn he exhibits some preference of sameness, which means, well, for example, it can be sufficient for him or for her that 20% of people who live in a neighborhood are like him, or just like it's a certain preference of sameness. So Schelling managed to show that even this 20% or 30% of preference, call it like ethnic preference or religious preference, that you want to live next to the people like you, results in after enough turns, after enough iterations, results in this kind of segregation. But the problem is that certain research in social and intercultural psychology suggests that that would probably next slide. Yes, so that the greater the cultural distance between cultures, the greater preference of sameness, which means the more culturally distant a culture you're living next to is, then your preference of sameness is done. And then pay attention to these things: low cultural distance, high cultural distance. These are the concepts that were in the sciences, in psychology, inconceivable like two or 3 or 4 decades ago. But now you have intercultural psychologists who claim these are like cognitive factors. If there's like low cultural distance, we can argue about history, politics, but we won't clash about the undermining values. If so, for example, Poles with Germans and Ukrainians will really be angry about history, how they interpret this, but they more or less agree on this kind of core values of their societies. Whereas, for example, you take someone from Pakistan, there will be no conflicts related to politics, to the ways of living, but the underlying values might be different because these cultures did not evolve, in interaction with one another. So, another idea is law. We already covered the idea of law in Spengler, but the idea is that what we are facing currently is the deteriorization of legal norms. I'll give you the example of Macron's idea of structuration of Islam. He claimed, basically what he needed was to ask the Muslim community to treat French law as superior over Sharia law. And he was attacked from both sides. He was attacked by Muslims that saying, no, Sharia, I mean, we first follow Sharia, then it's your law. And he was also attacked by the French left, claiming, you're mixing stuff. I mean, you're just intruding on the region of religion, right? Like, just you can't do this. And his reform probably, will probably not come to fruition at all. So, what we can expect as a consequence of the probable failure of the ideas to reform this kind of attitudes is legal pluralism, which is purely neo-medieval feature. So it's quite possible in the future that according to a declared worldview or religion, you could be subject to different law at same territory. And you can look at that, wow, it's a crap. It's already happening in the UK, when in the civil cases, Sharia becomes the source of law as a civil principle. You can read the essay by Piotr Krutkowski, Metropolitan Identity Islam and the Millet System in the volume I edited, Cities in the Neo-Medieval Era, to confirm this. I have like 2 minutes, I know that. Economics. So in Pax Roman stage, okay, we will disagree on that, about the thermal shocks probably, but the idea is that what we are observing throughout Europe is that people are gradually more ready to give up like freedoms for the sake of stability and safety. So I'm just saying it's Kantian need of protector, because Kant was writing about this in Summa Evident Freedom, I think. But this thing is visible. We speak about security, about terrorism. Our liberal identity is waning. We can actually see this as a civilizational trend, and as a result, in the next iteration, next era, we'll probably face phenomena like new feudalism. So in China, we have this swarm capitalism of surveillance, automated control, and predictability. And we will be, individuals in the European system will be, will gradually say, okay, just give me a predictable life, I don't have to earn much. You can control my spheres of life normally I would not allow you to control, but give me stable life, right? And also a neo-medieval feature, another feature is the expansion of ethical principles. And I'm speaking not about CSR principles, but the very way of argumenting that the pure capitalism in terms of economy is not sufficient. The problem is that neo-feudal framework will be dismantling liberal democracy, and this is the image from Hallberg's very good essay about how. Okay, I'm almost finished. Sorry. Okay. So, if ever more powerful algorithm is about technological progress would be controlled by a few decision makers and reduce our self-determination, we would fall back in a feudalism 2.0 as important historical achievements would be lost. And I quite agree with this risk. So, just finishing, this is all for me to say that we should look at history partially in Spenglerian, because Spengler believed in cycles, but we should also kind of add the linear dimension. Some macrostructures, processes re-emerge, but they create a kind of spiral of history because it has its own mechanics, and I'm just trying to say time, randomness, and path dependency add new variables to the picture that alter overall outcome. So, for example, time. Accumulated tech progress allows for new solutions. So there were solutions we didn't have in the Roman era, even in Spengler's era. Randomness. Low probability events can change anything. Butterfly effect, black swan, you all know these terms. Atomic bomb, or even zombies could attack, right? So it would basically change the overall pattern of the future. Path dependency, the idea, the story from China. China at some point was considering. Excuse me?
Zheng He, he was the Chinese guy who traveled around the world, he discovered everything, but then the emperor said, so what have you discovered?
Yeah.
The whole world is
so basically, lack of political will basically set China on the path that prevented China from, conquering or just expanding in America, and it could not be reversed. Just to finish things up, Spengler was partially right, and when I think of Spengler, I always think of a man of big data in the world without big data, because he thought of all of these all these tables, trying to fit stuff into this kind of schemes, but the problem is he didn't have the data. We have the data, which makes me say that a new empirical theory of civilizational change is needed. And this theory should abolish our previous notion of politics, economics, and culture as autonomous spheres of inquiry. It should account for fluidity and this the network nature of civilizational processes I mentioned. And it would be non-discriminatory because one of the accusation against civilization as a mode of analysis that is kind of building walls between the people because it's putting someone in, someone out. And it's not this advertisement, but I'm actually working on the book based on my PhD to create this kind of theory that would be both empirical, would be inspired by Spengler, by Toynbee, by different authors, but would basically not commit their mistakes, and but would again allow us to understand civilization. So yeah, that's welcome to the Middle Ages. We're evolving fast. Yeah, that's it.